Jeanne Sarson and Linda MacDonald live on Mi'kmaq territory, and we are deeply grateful for them coming to us at 4 a.m. Canadian time. They are Canadian feminists, retired public health nurses, independent activists, researchers, and scholars with a just-released book, Women Unsilenced: Our Refusal to Let Torturer Traffickers Win. They have spent the past 28 years as grassroots supporters of women who have survived non-state torture, trafficking, and other forms of sexualized exploitation perpetrated within intimate relationships. Their work is national and international, and they have been contacted by women from many countries, including Australia and New Zealand. They have given expert testimony to their government, worked with NGOs worldwide on the violence of non-state torture perpetrated against women and girls, and have been actively engaged in sessions at the UN in New York, Geneva, and Vienna since 2004, advocating for the need for torture by non-state actors to be acknowledged as a violation of women's and girls' human rights, as declared in Article 5 of the UN Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Their website is worldwideweb.nonstatetorture.org, and you can find Linda on Twitter at LindaMacNST. Could you please introduce yourselves a little further and give us some details of your involvement in advocating for women's sex-based rights?
This 28 years hasn't been an easy journey. So in order for us to stay healthy, we both want to speak wherever we do. That's why we share everything that we do, so that we get equal chance to use our voice. So you identified some things about us, Janet. We're both mothers as well, and grandmothers, and have four little grandchildren, all girls. I have 3 and Jeanne has 1. So we have lots of girls that we're worrying about coming up as new little children in the world. So that's, of course, one of the reasons why we're here. And I wanted to explain to people, because I was listening to someone else talking about activism and how activism is not really funded. And our work has never been funded. We've always self-funded our work the 28 years, except for a rare occasion where we had someone who could afford to pay. So we just decided as feminists that we would work full-time in another job and do this job as well. And that's how we've done the work all these 28 years. Otherwise, we would probably have been silenced or had been troubled with grants and all kinds of things. So we just plugged forward. And non-state torture was a term that we coined as well. And I'm interested to hear, Jessica, that you use the term. So that's proud to say that we're supporting your life and your healing. And one of the things that came up in the work that we do is one of the persons that was tortured, the torturer was imprisoned, and he then wanted to be placed in a women's prison. And that really alerted us to how horrific it would be in prison, because we knew how he was such a very vicious torturer. To think that he would have full access to women in prison was just outrageous. That was one of the litmus points of us moving forward. But we've been very active in promoting our work around non-state torture, and that's where our primary activism has been. But as you can see, our book, Women Unsilenced, we're very clear that we're supporting women and girls, and we're not going to have that word erased for anyone. And we were active in a demonstration here in front of our own women's prison in Truro, Nova Scotia, where we live, saying that men should not be imprisoned with women ever. And some of the small things that we've done in the community is I requested the book on trans and material matters to be ordered into our library, and that was done. So I'm hoping that young people will be able to read the books and think differently, have an alternate voice. But we haven't been really vocal about same-sex, about women's sex biology as yet. But I'm sure it will come as our book keeps unfolding, as we talk to more and more people.
What made you first realize transgenderism is a threat to women's rights?
I was working on a fact sheet because Linda and I have been connected to an NGO in Vienna in around the issue of trying to raise more knowledge about non-state torture or non-state actor torture. And the only reason really that it's invisible is because for decades, since the Universal Declaration, it was always invisibilized, and women were never seen to have that right to own Article 5 that said no one should be subjected to torture. So as a consequence of that, the whole social conditioning globally has been to ignore what Jessica has said, the degree of victimization that women are subjected to. And of course, what we have found that often when we talk about torture, that people want to say, well, that's assault. Assault will do. It will not do. And as I was working on the fact sheet, I was looking at some of the research we have, and I counted 114 group who had answered the question on whether they were subjected to non-state torture in their opinion. And so I thought what I would do when I was making the fact sheet, I would pull out at least two issues that globally state torturers, it's identified that state torturers use that tactic. And one was electric shocking and the other one was waterboarding. So in the home, waterboarding is like holding a woman or a girl in the tub underwater. I mean, we worked with a woman who her husband actually groomed her and held her captive along with three male friends who took her out of Nova Scotia to another Canadian province, put her in a room with a light bulb and nothing else, and tortured and then trafficked her into what she saw as prostitution. So he used to hold her under the tub and count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, bitch, and kept putting her down, and she never knew whether she would be drowned in the tub or not. But under the 114 that I was looking at tonight, 47% of those women identified that water torture was an issue for them. And for the electric shocking, 46% identified that they were electric shocked. So that's a degree of harm that is life-threatening, and we should not at all minimize it in any way. And then I looked at a group of 30 women who said they were involved in prostitution and were tortured in prostitution by the pimps or the buyers. And what Linda and I learned with that one, that 50% of that 30, they suffered phalangia, and phalangia is the beating of the feet. And that's also another form of state torture. So the idea of minimizing violence against women that should not be addressed as torture is wrong. So it's very important that Article 8 around the degree of violence against women on this planet identifies that torture by non-state actors, which are parents, can be a father, a husband, a brother, neighbors, and they have pleasure in what they do. That's the other thing that we don't see talked about, is the pleasure that torturers have. And the women have told us, even when they were little, they knew that the torturers were having pleasure. So it's breaking the silence is really important. So as far as the transgenderism, as a nurse, it makes no sense to me when they say that biology and physiology does not matter. It absolutely matters. outside of that, I would be practicing dangerously if I didn't keep in my mind the biology, the sex of women, and what is happening with them. So that certainly is a conversation that Linda and I have had. And the thing of tortures, whether they're state or non-state, torture can dehumanize, and actually the majority of women that have answered our questionnaire say that they were treated as non-human. So it's very important for Linda and I to acknowledge that they are women and they deserve that right to be able to say, I am a female, I am a woman, and that's the sex that I claim. If we didn't stand firm with that, it would be like, for me, a violation of trust. They've trusted us to hear what they have to say. They've trusted us to heal, to claim their personhood, their womanhood. So I guess there's just no space for Linda and I to let go of the fact that sex-based identity is absolutely essential.
Is there an area of activity in which you focus your efforts to resist gender identity? And where has that taken you?
Jeanne and I have had a lot of discreditation about the work that we're doing around non-state torture, because when we first started back in the 90s, whenever we started telling the stories that the women were telling us about the torture that they endured, people really literally believed that we were mentally ill, that we were, crazy women of the community. And we know that because they told us years later, as we became more credible, they apologized, some of them, and admitted they really did think we were mentally ill. And that people shunned us, ran away from us. We were isolated in the community, and also had malicious complaints against us. So we've had a lot of attacks against us for standing around non-state torture. And we were always cautious to only take on one issue, because we knew that if we took on more than one, the non-state torture would become invisibilized. And then, of course, the women that we are depending on us to get the story and the reality out, they'd become invisibilized. So we never stood on the margins, excuse me, with any more than one issue. It's only been this last year that we felt, since our book is out and the issue is just so terrible around sex-based rights, that we were speaking now. Not that we didn't think it was wrong all along, but we were cautious about when the timing of it was. But on the personal level, my nieces are young feminists, and they do not agree with me at all around sex-based rights. And I had a discussion with my sister, who's a teacher, and she doesn't agree with me either. And what's happening is, excuse me, there's a rift coming now in my family because of my stand around it. And it really doesn't matter to me in the end who the rift is with. I am not giving up on the reality that I'm a woman, or that my daughters is a woman, or my granddaughters are going to be women, or that any women are women in this world. And I see now in Canada, they're saying that it would be against the law, to go in court and not give your pronouns. Well, if I had to go to court right now and was told that I had to give my pronouns, I would refuse. I'm not buying this. I know that there's a time when people will look back and think that this is really a very bizarre time in society, but it's just another face of patriarchy trying to use misogyny against us as women. And I'm pretty stubborn that way, or pretty determined. So I'll be I'll stand regardless of the circumstances. And that's where Jeanne and I both are.
Can you tell us a little about the opposition that you meet in your work and how this impacts you personally?
We've stayed really quite focused on the issue of non-state torture, because in 1993, when the first woman came to us, it took us into a realm of reality that really we knew nothing about. we both grew up in families with very violent fathers, and we've both as women, I as a child and Linda as a young adult, suffered sexualized violence, but we had no idea. We were working one night a week, especially in our community, to offer to the community and to individuals who had suffered, identified violence in their lives, either as children or as adults, a way to identify in a non-pathology way, because violence against women and girls is not a pathology, it's a crime. And we wanted to offer that service to the community, and that's how the woman came to us and very quickly started revealing torture. And when we looked in our country and globally, torture in the family or in intimate relationships was not anywhere to be seen. So when we went to our government to try to identify that indeed in Canada, to Canadian women and Canadian children, that torture was happening, we were met with discrimination, because they really have refused to acknowledge it. Even though they know now that it exists, they still refuse legally to acknowledge it and do something about it. So where I'm feeling the transgendered issue, it's overtaking the equality that needs to come into society to value what women do, because that idea of devaluing that women have the right to say I'm a woman is really dismissing the violence that they're suffering. And it's impacting that way. And in our book, we call it political cruelty, because I don't know how we expect women and girls to heal if they go on out into society that's trying to invisibilize them. You know, it's another form of re-victimization immediately. They don't identify that a crime has been committed against them. We were in a workshop and one woman said, well, nobody ever told me before that I had a crime committed against me. She said, I've been for 30 years into therapy and nobody said it was a crime to begin with. And to me, when our country fails to do that, they have to be held to account. And then they come into the transgendered issue and it invisibilizes the reality even further. So I find that very distressful. But again, as a nurse, I find it distressful in the fact that they're trying to eliminate anatomy. Like if a woman says her breast was cut or her nipple cut off, we can't call that chest, that's a breast, you know, and that kind of language, when you've been tortured and dehumanized, and some women did not know they had skin, they did not even know they had a physical body, and then that kind of pressure tries to dehumanize them further. It's totally unacceptable for me to be a caring person to another human being who was female. And I guess, Jessica, even to support you, I'd like to say that the women in our book are, you had, Jessica, the sign around respect up there and dignity. The women in the book that we're giving voice to, they expect us to stand for that. And I would not think of standing any other way. So yesterday we got an email from one woman who's in the book. And I thought, because none of the women are here that are in the book with us, we're standing for them. But I thought I'd like to share what she said, because I think it's important. She's a woman, she identifies as a woman. She said, thank you, and she's emailing me. but she includes Linda. Thank you, Linda. Thank you and Linda for being my safety net all these years and sharing my voice when I was unable to directly do it for myself. The gratitude I feel for you and Linda is beyond any words I can think of. And that's, to me, why Linda and I have to stand as we do, because any other stand would invisibilize them, just like the torturers ignored them, treated them as non-human, without dignity, without voice, without thought. We just could not do that. So I guess that's how the opposition comes, you know, trying to invisibilize, and we will resist that.
What are the next steps for you in your work? And do you have suggestions for attendees tonight?
A big intervention we did, I mentioned earlier, was our book. We wrote the book, Women Unsilenced. That's our key intervention, because people were still, I think, not getting how serious non-state torture is and what it really is. So we're hoping that when people read our book, they tell us that it finally makes sense to them when they sit down and read it all. Because, you know, we've woven it in such a way with the theory and the research and the science and the women's stories that it's a complete package. So that's our next step, is promoting it more, making it more visible, and hopefully women in this chat or in this webinar will take a look at it. But I do think that and I'm asking women to start thinking about how many women really are tortured, because torture for women is very, very sexualized, because the sexualized torture is so pleasurable for the perpetrators that the primary MO is the sexualized torture. And that's because of our bodies. That's because of our biology, you know, that we have breasts, that we have a vagina. And they find many ways to really destroy women's bodies, you know, that are being tortured. So I think it's really wise that the Women's Human Rights campaign has taken a human rights focus. That's been Jeanne and my focus. And Article 5, as Jeanne mentioned, is about that no one shall be subjected to torture, and that means women and girls. And I think that by taking a human rights perspective, we're making a stand that what happens to women is a human rights violation and a crime, that we're not mentally ill, that we're not going to be pathologized because we've endured violence, whatever it is, from neglect right through to non-state torture or femicide, that none of us are mentally ill. So that just has to stop that kind of conversation. You know, Freud created the hysteria model, and we're still living under the ramifications of that grave injustice. So I'm really pleased that that's one of the reasons why I'm so proud to be part of this group, is the human rights perspective. And for us to really keep pushing that. And Jeanne and I are going to, you know, we have a lot of inroads in the United Nations because we've been going there since 2004. It's a long road because it's a slow process. It's still a patriarchal structure, like any structures in patriarchy are, but we are making inroads, and you find good people along the way. And so that's what I'm recommending, is for people to use the United Nations, because it takes you outside of your country, Jessica. If your country's not listening, then you can start to socially shame your country. And if enough of us work collaboratively at the United Nations globally, we should be able to make a stand about our sex-based rights and our rights as women and girls.